I'd like to introduce you to our first keynote speaker, Shivani Soroya, CEO and founder of Tala, a company that offers digital financial services to help those without access to banking services borrow, save, and grow their money. In this fireside chat style keynote, Shivani will describe why she left investment banking to build a fintech startup, how Tala's unique infrastructure can help the company scale globally while meeting country-specific needs, and how they plan to use cryptocurrency to further enable financial access. Today's first keynote session will be moderated by Dr. Jennifer Walsky, who is an adjunct assistant professor at Anderson and the former faculty director of Impact at Anderson. Dr. Walsky is a writer, researcher, and investor, and sits on numerous for-profit and nonprofit boards. Her award-winning research centers on the funding and scaling of social startups and social venture capital firms. Prior to her academic career, Dr. Walsky was an investment banking securities analyst and regular commentator on both CNN and CNBC. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Shivani and Dr. Walsky. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Isn't it great to be here together today? I mean, just look around this room. So much allyship. It's really, really lovely. So, Shivani, I have spent a big part of my career looking at organizations with purpose and profit. And it's so wonderful to kick off today's event to discuss your career journey and your founding of Tala, which not only empowers the whole area of impact investing, but empowers many, many other women as well. So let's talk about this. You had a long history involved with the UN and other organizations before founding your own firm. I know many students come to UCLA and are founding their own firm or have a dream of founding their own firm. And as we all look together and rise, maybe you can tell us, what was that moment where you decided this was something you needed to do?
Well, first of all, I'm so excited to be here, and thank you again. I think it's, I don't know, I will admit, on my drive here, the first thing I have to mention is, it's one of my first in-person events. But more importantly, I think it's also kind of this idea that we are really coming out of hibernation a little bit. And so it feels really special to be doing this with you and, talking about both impact, talking about, again, female leadership at this moment, just because, again, we see so much inequality happening right now. And so it means a lot to me to be here. So thank you. In terms of when I think about my journey, I think the other reason I wanted to bring that up is sometimes you actually don't know when the journey is starting. And so when I worked at the UN Population Fund, I was given a task by my manager at the time to understand, how were micro borrowers using their loans? Where was the money actually going in the system? And so it sounds like a really simple thing to do, to say, oh, you give someone a $300 loan, and what we want to understand is, what's the benefit of that? But then you actually realize that all of those loans were being given in cash. And when we think about emerging markets, there's no national ID systems, there's no credit bureaus, there's no really formal credit history or receipts that are in any kind of data source. So I got to our first market, which at the time was Ghana, and I went to the country office and said, give me the data, give me the number of borrowers, it'll be great, I'll put it into my model, because from working in investment banking, the one thing I knew how to do was build cost-benefit models. And I was, very just clued in on the data aspect. And they looked at me and said, you're crazy, there's no data here. And so in order to get the data, I actually did individual interviews. And over the 4.5 years that I worked at the UN Population Fund, I interviewed a little over 3,500 individuals in person. And when I say interview, really it was becoming a walking QuickBooks. I would go to their homes in the morning, I would go to work with them. I would sit in the back of their stores and actually tally how many products they sold, how many customers came in that day. And then I would walk alongside them at the end of the day when they counted their cash, go to the market with them, understand how much went to food, utilities, their kids' education. And then I would go back home and understand how much went under a mattress or into a lockbox. And what I started to realize by following essentially money was that there was an enormous amount of potential in this segment and this customer base. But I also was able to see across 9 different countries that this problem existed everywhere. And so it wasn't just a country-specific or regional-specific problem, but truly a global problem. And so subconsciously, by believing in these individuals, I actually ended up lending to them myself. And so when you ask the question of, how did I start or when did it start? In some ways, it started because I was there. I was proximate to this problem. And because I viscerally believed in the potential that they had, I actually used my own capital. So that was the first piece of it. The second piece of it, I think, is, I had a friend actually come visit me I was in one of the markets when I was in India at the time. And, he looked at me and he said, I think you're completely crazy. You're using your capital and you're lending to these individuals without really even knowing them. And I was like, that's not true, and I rattled off essentially a few things that made me, again, really believe in their potential. But what I started to describe was actually daily life indicators. And so I mentioned to him, I picked this particular tile business owner because, she has the most number of customers that stay in her location during the week, or she consistently buys her inventory, every third Thursday of the month. I know she's also saving money for her son to go take this, vocational training program. So I was essentially describing things that allowed me to understand her identity, her capacity, her consistency, and her behavior. And so that was kind of that moment for me of realizing daily life data is actually how we understand, our needs, our capacity. And so working backwards to that, I started to just think of it as how could I then scale what I was doing in person? And that's really where digital technology started to come in.
So it's very interesting hearing your story because that's how Muhammad Yunus started too. Who we all think of the father of microfinance is personally lending to people in Bangladesh. And how do you sort of encapsulate that feeling you develop about somebody? Some of it's your gut, but some of it's not. Like you said, it's data-driven. You're with the people. You saw their behaviors. You saw what they did. And there's a lot in behavioral finance to say that can be a predictor, of repayment rates. So I do have some questions I want to ask you about COVID and other things, but just since we're on this topic, I want to skip to kind of the next question, which talks about how you then look at using people's behavior to make lending decisions. And there's a wonderful TED Talk, by the way, that Shivani's done. I recommend, if you haven't seen it yet, that you do catch that when you get a chance. But you do talk about, and we're all now socially connected. I mean, you look at Meta, you look at a lot of issues around data and transparency and being watched in our behavior, but that can also be put to good as well. So tell us a little bit about the Tala model and how you do use that to make some really wonderful decisions to support the unbanked.
So what we've developed is an Android application that allows us to instantly credit score an individual using a mix of their mobile data as well as behavioral data. And I think the other thing I want to mention is that our score doesn't stay static. So I don't know if many of you know in the US how our credit scores work here, but it takes a lot to actually change your score. And in our ecosystem, we really think of it as, no, if it's about your daily life, then that score actually should be something that continues to evolve with you. And so we have a score that is actually a first loan score, but then we also have repeat models, we have behavioral models. And so the kind of data that goes into this, when we think about mobile data and behavioral data, it is the same kind of indicators that really describe your capacity. And so in emerging markets, rather than paper receipts, you're actually getting a text message. So when you pay that phone bill or you pay that utility bill, you get a confirmation message in the form of a text message or an SMS. And so what we understood was actually with customers' permission, so when they download the application, they give us key permissions to allow us to actually bring in all of this transactional data. And so if you're familiar with Plaid in the US, it's actually very similar to that. So we've built our own software that allows us to actually parse for transaction messages, for other indicators like bank deposit information, employer deposits, anything that can be a proxy for cash flow. The other thing is that when we think about behavior and consistency, there's also other ways to start to understand an individual in terms of how do they actually think about liquidity, right? And so when we think about even just phone minutes, right? We may have unlimited plans, but the underestimated customer, or the underserved customer doesn't usually do that. They're usually really budgeting, and so they have prepaid plans. And so we can actually think of that prepaid plan as cash. And so that was something for us of, again, when we think about the data that we collect, we always think of it as, what's the context? What's the stories behind this data that we can actually glean from this? And so when we think about minutes, it's, okay, if I have 100, how am I using those? And so we want to understand, is this individual making a lot of long calls, long distance calls? Are they calling a close network? Or maybe they're a business owner and they're actually receiving a lot of calls instead of making outgoing calls. But these are all just little things that actually allow us to understand, again, consistency of cash flow and also the mindset that this individual may have around their financial life.
So UCLA is really big on impact investing. In fact, one of the female presidents is in the audience. Haley, do you want to say hi? There's probably quite a few others. She didn't know I was going to do that to her. She's a little embarrassed right now. But it's a big area for us. And clearly, you're a for-profit microfinance firm. And I know in my experience, we've written a case on Grameen. Grameen is nonprofit. I've had several conversations with Muhammad Yunus since the impact investing areas emerged about is it okay to be a microlending firm and be for-profit. We've also had some exemplars of SKS and Comportanos that went public and had some, people questioned, let's say, some of the money that was made through that transaction. You're for-profit, and you've raised an incredible amount of capital, $400 million. I mean, congratulations on that. It's really amazing. From a very diverse set of investors. How do you look at this and this whole question around, do well and do good, and really balance the demands of trying to perform to social metrics and also financial metrics to satisfy your diverse. I mean, she has foundations that are investors. She has some, lowercase capital, one of the huge angel investors in Twitter, just to really, Steve Case. It's very interesting, and I'm just curious how you sort of walk that line.
So I think for me, it is, it's a little bit about, maybe the balance I've had in my career as well. I started out in investment banking, and then from there went to go study data science, went to go work at the UN Population Fund, went back to investment banking. And so I've had that trajectory of feeling jaded in one area or the other, and feeling like really what we needed to create was something that was going to be mission-driven, but ultimately sustainable. And so that's what we really talk about internally, is that we can't further our mission and get to this audacious vision of serving 2.5 billion individuals around the world with holistic financial services if we're not profitable. And so I think for me, when I think about the impact investors on our board, crypto investors, as well as traditional venture capital, it is really about saying, no, we're not allergic to profitability because it furthers our mission. And I think then having a really strong North Star where every single global all hands, every single strategy meeting, every board meeting, I open with that mission and why we're there. And then we also report on, what is the financial health of our customers? Are we actually improving their lives? And so I think in some ways it's good to have that constant tension because I think it keeps you focused on both aspects of the work.
So we talked a little bit about the fact that if you turn on the TV, even last night, what I was doing right before I went to bed is you can watch about Elizabeth Holmes and the founder of, that didn't go so well, and the founder of Uber, and some of the cultural issues around that, who, by the way, dropped out of UCLA. Maybe if he had stayed and taken more management classes, Tony, it would have been a different outcome there, even as an undergrad. But, here we are, like I said, there's some questions around, it's really hard. I actually tell my students it's harder to run a for-profit company and then be this wonderful philanthropist, down the road than it is to walk the line of both at the same time. I also know from your TED Talk, your mom was a big influence. And my mom was as well. She produced two daughters, one who's a professor at UCLA, one who got her medical degree at UCLA. What's your North Star? Because I do think one of the things in all my work talking to social entrepreneurs, it's tricky at times when you feel the pressure, right, of trying to perform against financial and social performance. Where do you go back to sort of find that North Star?
So I think one of the things I talked about in the TED Talk, but more importantly, I think when I think of my mom, it's really about trust. And, I don't know if others feel this way, but at least my mother, she sees the world in really just like two things. One is really that, it's either you're lying or you're not lying. And I've always operated in a more gray, right? Where it's like, okay, well, why would someone do that? Let's try to understand it. But I think in some ways it's so simple for her, right? You're either trusting someone or you're not. And if you trust them, then you're willing to open your doors to them. And I think when I think about what we're building at Tala, it is this idea that anyone will be able to be a customer of ours, and that we do really operate from a place of trust. And so for me, when I think about what that means, it's that there are billions of individuals that are not trusted. And so it's not about profitability or how much money we will make or how much money I will make at the end of the day. I go back to that piece of fundamentally why I do this is to enable or engender more trust in the world. It's locked potential waiting to be unlocked, right? And you kind of wake up every single day remembering that if that's your North Star, then the work's never done because it's just a very, very big problem.
And that's what we find in our research, too. Social entrepreneurs are motivated mission first. I mean, that's what we hope anyways. And so that sense of that North Star is so, so very important. I have one last question, and then I would like to open it to the audience. I have lots of questions. Trust me, we could talk all day, and we've already been chatting in the speaker's room this morning, but I really want to take advantage of the fact that we're together to seek questions from the audience, too. So, allyship is important. It's super important, I think, at a conference like this. And I mean allyship with men, women, everyone. And I know in my career and or investment banking and tech and a variety of careers, those female friends have really sustained me. Where do you seek your allyship when you're looking at founding this company and growing it and managing this diverse board? And what tips can you give to the audience here today on how to do that well? I mean, I'm sure you have all the answers, right? No, I'm just, I was like, we're all learning, but I just would love to hear your insights.
Well, I think something I recognized maybe a few years ago, and I actually think that the younger generation is better at this than I think even our generation might be, which is talking about money. I do find that, even among my best friends, we never talk about it. And so I've started to be really awkward and put it out there more and talk about our titles, talk about, how much, stock options are we getting, how much money it's just an important aspect. And so I think in some ways we talk to each other or we'll vent to each other a lot about our relationships. I recently had twins, and so we'll talk about those things, but we don't talk about the things that make us really uncomfortable, or talk about things that, like, I don't know, have been traumatic, and then talk about, what would you have done differently, right? Like the lessons learned aspect. And so I've started to do that a lot more, but I've realized that it may not be my peer group, but actually, being able to talk to women that are further in their careers. And so when we think about, I think, that constellation, I think just ensuring that it is really diverse and that the constellation isn't just more people that look like us and that are in the same place in our careers, but actually having the uncomfortable conversation of how did you navigate it when actually, in some ways, the past was actually harder to navigate. Right? And it actually allows us to be maybe more in control now that there are more doors open. If that helps, I don't know. I'm still learning as well.
I think it helps. Do you guys think it helps? Yeah. So with that, do we want to open it up for questions from the audience? Are we ready for that?
Hi, I'm Margot, and thank you so much for being here and being at this event. This is amazing. I'm a UCLA first-year business school student. And my question is, I've also been involved in microfinance, and I wanted to ask, Tala and a few other microfinance companies in Kenya have been cited as, extending credit to borrowers who aren't able to pay back the loan. So I'm wondering, what guardrails have you been putting in place at Tala to prevent that?
So, this is very famous and actually hurt microfinance. I feel that microfinance is one of the proven areas in impact investing that really, because of the payment rate, especially during the financial crisis, but then in turn, all of the suicides and the over-indebtedness and all that became problematic too for SKS in particular. How do you guys manage that?
So for us, we're pretty strict on our policies in that we don't actually allow more than one loan outstanding at any given time. And so when we look at models, like some of them in Kenya, as well as SKS in particular, what you actually find is that there was a lot of rollovers. And so customers either had multiple loans out at a time, or they were actually taking out additional capital before paying it back in full. And so for us, that aspect of the first loan model, the repeat loan model, is really important because, again, we know customers' capacity changes over time, but if they can't repay that first loan, right, then we can't actually give them a new loan yet, because we believe that they had some sort of life event, something happened, or they don't value Tala enough. And so we don't allow more than one loan outstanding, but then what we also do is we actually work with them to understand what happened. And so we put payment plans in place, we put extensions in place so that they have a way back to Tala as well. The last thing I would say is that we also dynamically price to understand what is the true capacity of this individual, right? So rather than give them, let's say $500 out of the gate, when really their capacity is only $100, when we think about, again, traditional financial institutions or microfinance, origination or extension of capital is a metric that they think is very important. We don't think of it that way. We actually use our North Star as actually repayment behavior, rather than saying, oh, we should be really proud of ourselves that we've delivered over $2.5 billion in credit. It's actually much more about how many customers have we served and how many loans have actually been repaid. And so for us, our repayment rate globally is actually 97%. And it's really because we've actually been very conservative in both our approval rates, but also our extension rates.
And this is really important because you're providing an on-ramp for building credit. We're talking about giving loans to people that don't have at least a documented loan history. Where do you sort of see your organization going? I know we talked a little bit about this before we got on stage, as far as what other products and services you might be able to offer some of your customers.
I think that's totally right, because it is really about holistic financial services. And so I would say that, where I see Tala going is, I think, one, being the world's most accessible financial services platform. And we've, again, gone beyond credit in some of our markets already. So in both the Philippines as well as in Mexico, we offer, things outside of credit. So giving customers the ability to pay with Tala, giving customers the ability to save with us as well. And so I see us going beyond just credit. And we're making those inroads already. But I also see us as being a thought leader in terms of, I think, overcoming some of the things we've seen in traditional microfinance. So in a market like Kenya, as an example, we actually pulled together the first ever Digital Lenders Association because we saw the fact that, it's not a regulated industry. And so we have now 33 other digital lenders that we are working alongside to actually put out the first ever bill around, Bill of Rights for consumers, consumer protection, what is fair lending? And so we saw that in microfinance, there was this big backlash where eventually they, had something called the SMART campaign, which allowed customers to really have what's the baseline kind of experience that I'm going to get? How do we be transparent about our rates? The other thing we've done is really pushed for flat pricing. And so we don't actually have an accruing interest rate or any penalty fees. And so by us being one of the largest in the market, other lenders have now had to actually copy us to follow our practices. So I think it's both building additional products and really thinking about finance as holistic financial services, but it's also in some ways being willing to regulate yourself and take more of that kind of maybe developed market approach to financial services than you otherwise may want to as a startup.
Well, it all comes back to that trust issue you were talking about. It's harder to overcome that after the fact rather than to keep and maintain that going forward. Jill?
Hi. Oh, do you want me to hold it? Hi, my name is Nicole. I'm a first year at Anderson. And given that Tala operates globally, how do you tailor your specific services to each region? And how do you kind of work with people who are local to build a system that is sustainable and beneficial to everyone?
I guess it's like the reason I get excited about that is that we've been pretty intentional about it. So the first piece, I'll answer your second question first. The first piece is that, we're over 400 individuals on the team around the world. And so the U.S., I call it the U.S. office at this point because we're pretty dispersed, is actually our smallest office. Our largest offices are the Philippines, Kenya, followed by Mexico and India. And we have, full country leadership teams in our markets, but we also have product leaders, we have user research, we have engineering teams across these different markets. And so we really are seeing our customers every single day and then really, again, taking those local insights and bringing it into our product. And so I think that's been the first piece is really our team is actually enabling that localization. And then from an infrastructure perspective, we've also had to think very modular. And so I get really excited about it because one day I believe that, we can go beyond being a B2C company because we can really start to think about how can we leverage our infrastructure for others. And so we've built our own identity verification models. We've built our own digital KYC into our application. We've built really our own supply chain, and we are now one of the most interoperable payment systems across emerging markets. And so we're directly integrated into 7-Eleven or a Walmart or an OXXO, if you're familiar with that in Mexico. And so customers can just walk into a store and actually access Tala. They can pay their loans there. They can deposit money there. And then lastly, we do our own digital servicing as well as collections. And so when you think about it, we've really kind of redesigned how a financial system can work. And so eventually, my hope is that whether it's other financial institutions, microfinance institutions, nonprofits, they can actually not need to build their own infrastructure and they can leverage ours to access our customer base. And so, it's essentially not building everything yourself, but in terms of solving this global problem, how can we all work together? And so that's how we've done it, is that we have that modular infrastructure. And so there's a global aspect of the infrastructure in terms of global models, global payment mechanisms. but then we give each market the ability to customize it depending on their insights.
So I think we have a minute and 23 seconds left. Am I reading that clock correctly here in big digital letters in front of me? So I just think the last question is, it has to be quick. What do you think? You want to go for it? Cryptocurrency, you couldn't help but watch the Super Bowl, go Rams, right? I mean, pretty cool. But having it here in Los Angeles as well. But crypto ads are everywhere now, I feel like, and maybe it's to build trust with people that crypto's not at all, just a pyramid scheme. There's some real behind it. You're looking at crypto, so you're involved with crypto as an organization. How do you see that as a new financial instrument, and what sort of excites you about that? Yeah. Of course, in 42 seconds or less. No, I'm kidding. We can go over a little bit. So.
Well, I'll be really quick about it. I think there's two aspects that get me super excited. One, I think the power or the vision for decentralized finance, and the reason I started Tala was really putting more control and choice in consumers' hands. And so if we take that fully to the next level, the idea that a borrower or a woman in Kenya, is actually able to show her capacity and her ability and connect to a lender that could be, in the US or anywhere, right? That's truly what we're trying to all build towards, is this idea that, it can be fully decentralized. And so I'm excited about the infrastructure aspects, the aspect of how do we actually, again, do things like data as a service, and put identity out on the blockchain and capacity data on the blockchain. That's where I get excited from the infrastructure side. And then on the other side, I think when we think about cryptocurrency, and we see what's happening in the world right now, wouldn't it be really great if currency wasn't always fluctuating with political environments and regulation? And so again, I think cryptocurrency is starting to provide a mechanism for individuals to have, again, more stability, that peace of mind over their savings, and then from there they can actually start to move towards opportunity.
Well, with that, I think it's actually zero. It's time to say thank you so much for joining us today. It was very insightful.
Thank you.
Many levels.
Thank you so much.